as council and myself was to provide a forum for a public hearing involving or revolving around an ordinance that is under consideration, which would be an ordinance that would put ballot language on the November ballot. Have a seat. On the November ballot for a 0.4% increase to our city income tax that would basically take the income tax rate that we have in the city from 1.5% to 1.9%. Some of the reasons that we are considering this ballot language include the ever-increasing costs to try to continue to provide the same services that the city of Heath, the residents of the city of Heath have come to expect. There's some, over the past 6 to 8 months or so, Heath has been sharing information through our finance committee, city council finance committee, regarding various aspects of the financial situation of the city. We have some of those items for you here tonight. Let me point you to the first two sheets, which are a graph and then also a numerical breakdown of the end-of-year balance in the city's general fund. This fund is sometimes referred to as the city's carryover. When you go into a new calendar year and we have a new budget that's approved and in place, money that the city has that was not spent the previous year carries over into the new year. This general fund balance is the primary fund where that carryover is located. There's some other funds that we have that carry over some balances, but the general fund is the primary one. And the general fund, if you're not aware, is the fund that the city uses to operate the city offices, to operate the police department, the fire department, the parks and rec department, the street department. The water and wastewater departments in the city are separate. They are funded through the utility rates that we have for water and wastewater usage. So those are the primary functions of city government that are funded from the general fund. Now you'll notice, going back to 1984, the city had a pretty robust general fund carryover balance. The advantage of having a strong carryover is that when you're doing a big project as a city, bond council reviews the financial situation of the municipality. And when you're able to show strong carryover balances in your general fund, that indicates to bond council that you're a pretty safe bet, basically, for your bond rating. And Keith, I don't recall what our most recent bond rating was, but it was
AA2.
Okay. Which is a very favorable bond rating. And so obviously that has an impact on how much it costs us as a city to borrow the money that we would need for any kind of a major project or purchase. So the need to continue to have a strong bond rating is critical. You'll notice that in 2002, the general fund balance took quite a drop. Carryover took quite a drop compared to 2001. As I recall, the interest rates in 2002 were quite low, after the attacks on 9/11. I believe, Keith, that was a major impact to the carryover that we had, because the money that we had carried over and invested was beginning to not generate the interest revenue that it had before. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. In 2003, which was the last time that there was a ballot initiative for an income tax increase. And in 2003, that increase being asked for from the voters was a 0.5% increase. You'll see that the general fund carryover balance was slightly less than $2 million. The ballot initiative in 2003 failed. The income tax rate stayed at 1.5% in the city. You'll notice that from 2003, 2004, 2005, the general fund balance gradually began to increase. One of the reasons why the general fund balance began to go back up again, despite not having an income tax increase, is reflected in the next two sheets that you have, which are the end-of-year fund balances in the Capital Improvement Fund. Now, the Capital Improvement Fund is what is used to make many of the equipment and infrastructural improvements that we have in the city. For instance, if a snowplow needs to be replaced, that purchase is probably going to come from the Capital Improvement Fund. If paving is going to take place in a neighborhood, any city funds used in that project are typically going to come from the Capital Improvement Fund. The replacement of police cars, the replacement of fire trucks and squads. Money from those purchases, a good deal of the money from those purchases is going to come from the Capital Improvement Fund. So in essence, the Capital Improvement Fund is the money that is used to invest in the infrastructure and equipment that the city needs in order to provide the services that everybody comes to expect. You'll notice that in the capital improvement spending, prior to 2003, we were spending millions of dollars each year in capital improvements. Those who lived in the city at that time, I'm sure, can attest to the good condition of the streets at the time. There were other purchases that were made in that capital improvement fund, but you'll see that we were spending a significant amount of money in capital improvements. This isn't money that goes into people's pockets. This is money that goes toward the things that people use or are used for the people in the city. Heath, do you recall back around the mid-90s, what was the percentage of income tax revenue that was allotted by ordinance to the capital improvement fund?
In the mid-90s, it was 40 to 50%.
Okay. So for every dollar that the city was bringing in income tax revenue, the city was putting 40 to 50 cents of that dollar into the capital improvement fund for the items and initiatives that I had outlined, and others. After 2003, you can see how those capital improvement fund expenditures have significantly dropped. Right now, the city only puts 3% of its income tax revenue into the capital improvement fund. So we have been eating away at the end of year fund balance in the capital improvement fund for years. Now,
If you're ever gonna repeat a number for the press, that 3% number is the one to repeat.
yeah,
And for comparative purposes, Newark is 15%.
correct.
that
City of Newark
they
currently,
earmark toward capital improvements, and that's not enough for them.
yeah. So currently, as Keith has said, the City of Newark targets 5 times the percentage of their income tax revenue toward capital improvements that the City of Heath does. Now, what does that mean? First of all, what it means, as you can see in the general fund balance, is that the fund balances have been going down, and we haven't been spending anywhere near in capital improvements what we used to. It also means, as many of us who drive through the city are aware, the condition of our streets are not what they used to be. We have not been able to maintain an adequate paving program in the city for years. It is something that I think is now becoming all too evident. You can only delay those items that need to be addressed for so long before they become, painfully evident that they have been neglected. And in an effort to continue to provide the same level of service to the citizens of Heath over the past 9 years or so, this is one area that has been underfunded in order to do that. There's other areas as well. Before 2003, the city had, I believe, 6 full-time firefighters on duty, along with a part-time program of part-time firefighters. I believe that's correct, Keith. As a cost-saving measure, the part-time program was eliminated. And through attrition, there are now 5 full-time firefighters on duty at any one time as opposed to 6, which is the exact number that our contract with the IAFF requires as minimum manning for the city. The police officers that we have on staff are not at the number that they used to be. The street department employees, just about every department through attrition after 2003 have less people working in those departments today than they did prior to 2003. That information is reflected on the last sheet that you have, which indicates the number of city employees from year to year. You'll see that in 2011, we were at the lowest number of city employees since 1997. Now, I think that it needs to be said that the fact that most people have not noticed any reduction in the services that they've received from the city, including myself, I think it's a testament to the employees of the city of Heath that we have on staff now, because the services that we've provided have not lagged. Our streets are still plowed, I would say, better than anybody else's in the county, and I'd like to see anybody anywhere do better than our guys do. We still are able to salt the streets prior to the snow coming. There's no doubt that when it's winter time people are driving through Licking County, they know when they've entered the city limits of Heath, because they can tell the difference in the condition of the streets. Our police officers, although not at the same number, are handling more calls for service, making more arrests, investigating more crimes than they did 10 years ago. Our calls for service in the fire department have not decreased over the past 10 years. So I think that it needs to be recognized that the employees that we have working for the city work hard for the residents and have done a good job over the years in continuing to provide those levels of service. But we have let some things slip. As I mentioned, the street paving can be pretty clear and evident. Also, there's a number of neighborhoods where the concrete curbs are crumbling away and deteriorating pretty badly. We have, in essence, since 2003, using various means, cutting back here, through attrition, reducing manpower there, instituting revenue generation things such as the EMS billing in the fire department, which the money from the EMS billing goes into the general fund. The city has, in a way, through smoke and mirrors, been able to continue to provide the same level of service, but there comes a point in time where you run out of smoke and you run out of mirrors. And I fear that we are approaching that point. This past year, 250,000, somewhere around in there, I think was the number, that was transferred from the budget stabilization fund into the general fund.
It was 265.
Was it 265? Okay.
Don't hold me to that. I think that's the number.
We have a budget stabilization fund in the city which receives money from a number of sources. It was the fund where the photo traffic enforcement camera money went into in 2009. It is the fund where estate tax revenue has gone into over the years. It is, as it's described, a fund that's there to stabilize the budget should the need arise. We transferred $265,000 at the end of this year out of that fund into the into the general fund in order to maintain a $2 million carryover in that general fund. Now, it's important that you understand how the general fund works. The balance in the general fund doesn't just stay like this throughout the calendar year. It drops as money is being spent, particularly in the first quarter of the year, and then as money comes into the city, it goes up, 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 up again. So you don't want to start a year without money in that fund, because you will shortly end up with a situation where you can't pay your bills. I think that's a pretty accurate description, right, Keith?
In March, I pointed out to council, and if I'm, again, remembering this right, I think it was the general fund dipped to about 358,000. Yes. That's why I've somewhat arbitrarily grabbed that $2 million end of year balance that we need to achieve.
So, in short, we cannot continue to operate long-term by cutting the corners that we have, not adequately investing in the city's infrastructure through its streets, roads, curbs, equipment. The day of reckoning is going to come. And I believe, first of all, two things. Number one, I believe that it is far easier to recognize a threat to services that the residents receive and trying to address that threat prior to those services being lost, rather than having those services lost, then trying to reestablish them. I think it costs more money in the long run to do the latter than the former. And second of all, and maybe even more important than that, I believe that the people of Heath take a lot of pride in living in Heath. I think the people of Heath take pride in the fact that Heath is what I consider to be a cut above many other areas in Licking County and in this region. And we're not the only municipal government that is facing this situation. In the 2011 state budget, the state cut by more than half over a 2-year period of time the funds that local governments receive through the local government fund that comes from the state. That money is used to help provide some of the services that the state requires be received by people. The state also last year passed a law which will eliminate the estate tax. Now, regardless of what one thinks of the fairness of an estate tax, that's beside the point. The point is that was revenue that was coming to local governments. Over the past 5 or 6 years, on average, the city of Heath has received a little more than $200,000 a year in estate tax. Heath, do you happen to recall what the number is so far for 2012? I want to say it's north of 200. Am I thinking correctly?
So.
Okay. After this year, the estate tax will no longer apply. That money will go away and cannot be replaced. Every local government, as Keith and I have lamented in the past, we're all driving off the same cliff. Some are in cars that go faster than others. Some are closer to the edge of the cliff than others. But every municipality, the people that live in them, have a decision to make in the not too distant future. And I think that the time for Heath to make that decision is upon us. Do we want to be a city in which people are capable of living? Or do we want to be a city in which people will want to live? That's really the question. We can continue to not pave streets. That won't make the city a place where people are going to want to live more. We can, if need be, try to make further reductions in the city's workforce, but it's extremely hard to identify where any reductions can come from that aren't going to be seen by the public through reduction of service. If we were to eliminate one more person from our street department, it becomes very hard to see how we salt and plow the streets to anywhere near the same degree that we do. We have 3 full-time people that work in our parks department. 3. They have Geller Park, they have Hoback Park, they have Hitchcock Park, they have Dorsey Mill Park, the Shea House is Parks and Rec property. It's amazing.
Several linear parks.
Yeah, it's amazing what we get from the 3 employees, the 3 full-time employees that we have in our parks department. I don't know how they do it. I don't know how they do it. It's hard to see how any reduction in this number could occur without people noticing services being gone. And it's those services, and it's the condition of the city, and it's the investments that we make as a city in our infrastructure and in our equipment that makes the city of Heath a place where people want to live. I think that's what people in Heath want. That's what we strive every day to try to provide through city government and city employees. And that's why I am supportive of trying to have this tax increase passed. Now let me explain just for a couple minutes what we're looking at as far as the nuts and bolts of this. The ordinance that you have in front of you indicates that the income tax increase would be 0.4%. Currently, our income tax rate in the city of Heath is 1.5. This would take it to 1.9. Now, who pays that 1.9%? Or I'm sorry, who would pay that 1.9%? People who live in Heath and work in Heath would pay 1.9%. Businesses in the city would withhold payroll tax from employees who live outside the city at this 1.9%. If you are retired and do not pay income tax to the city of Heath, this obviously would not impact you. Council on Monday at our next city council meeting will likely introduce a resolution changing the income tax credit that we give to residents of Heath who work outside the city. Currently, if you live in the city and work outside the city, you receive a 1.25% credit on the 1.5% income tax rate, meaning that in whatever municipality you work, you pay their payroll tax. And if their payroll tax rate is greater than 1.5%, you pay, no, yeah, well, I'm sorry, what? If it's greater than, if it's greater than 1.5, Kim, right? They pay a quarter to us.
Or if it's equal to.
It's equal.
Yeah.
Equal to or
1.5 or equal to one to
They'll
1.5.
They'll get up to 1.25 if where they work is at least that tax or more. That one.
So let's say, for instance, you live in Heath and you work in Newark. Currently, you pay 1.75% payroll tax to the city of Newark, and you pay 1/4% payroll tax to the city of Heath, income tax to the city of Heath. The resolution coming up on Monday will address a promise in writing from our city council, if passed. And that promise would say that we will increase that credit. There has been conversation as to what that increased amount would be. Originally, we looked at a 0.2% increase in the credit, and a 0.4% increase in the credit was also discussed. I'm going to advise council that we increase the credit by 0.4%. Now, what does that mean for people who live in the city of Heath but work outside the city of Heath? Unless you are in a working in a municipality that has an income tax rate that is less than 1.65%, you also will not see an increase in your income tax that you pay to the city of Heath. Let's use Newark for an example. You pay 1.75% to Newark. That's greater than 1.65. You would continue to pay the 1.75% to Newark, and you would continue to pay to the city of Heath the 1/4% that you are today. So those people will not see any difference in the income tax that they pay. Newark's rate is 1.75. Columbus's rate is 2.5 for their income tax. So if you worked outside the city in Newark, Columbus. We can maybe put together a list of other areas around, Kim. If the rate that you pay where you work is less than 1.65%, you would see an increase so that your total payment would be 1.9. Nobody in the city would pay a payroll tax, total payroll tax out of their check. Nobody in the city of Heath would pay less than 1.9. But many of those who work outside the city would pay more than 1.9 because the rate at where they work is higher. Now, what would we intend to do with the new revenue if this ballot initiative increasing the tax rate were to pass? I have said to council that our goal needs to be focused on increasing capital improvement funding. We have not been spending the money in capital improvements, in the infrastructure, and things that we need to be, and we need to do that again. Our focus will be on capital improvement spending. In fact, just as we're going to have a resolution that could promise an increase in the tax credit, I am going to propose to council that we also have a resolution that promises, if the voters pass this increase, that we are going to change the percentage of income tax that we put toward toward capital improvements. As I look at the dollar amounts for this, I can see the range of that percentage being anywhere from 13 to 15%. Anywhere up to a 5 times greater contribution than what we have today. Depending on what the final figures would come out as far as the total income tax coming in. The reason why I say a range of 13 to 15% is because I want to try to target about $1 million a year from income tax revenue going toward capital improvements. That's the kind of funding level that we need if we're going to repave the streets that need to be repaved, if we're going to replace the curbs that need to be replaced, if we're going to continue to have snow plows and police cars and ambulances and fire trucks that can respond to the service needs of the residents. We need to look to have that kind of funding in order for us to be able to invest in the infrastructure items that I'm talking about. So my commitment, and I have not received any dissension from City Council on this in the conversations that we've had, so I think it's safe for me to say that the commitment from the entire city government is that the vast majority of the new revenue that we would receive will be put toward the capital improvement investments that will directly be benefiting all of us as residents of Heath. So I've kind of outlined in a not so short period of time where we've been, where we are, and what the future will hold if or if not the income tax issue that we're looking at doesn't pass. Does anybody have any questions? Yeah, Shel.
So how much do you think would you expect in 2013 if this were passed under all these assumptions?
Kim, our tax commissioner, worked up some figures for us. We're estimating that if there is a 0.4% increase in the income tax rate and a 0.4% increase in the credit for those who work outside the city, that will generate an additional 1.3, almost 1.35 million per year. And as I said, what I want to try to target is that, most of that money, a large chunk of that money, be put directly toward capital improvement funds so that we can make those investments that I outlined. But as we're estimating right now, Shelley, the numbers that we're looking at and using, that's where we're thinking it would come in.
See, over the years, we've always tried to maintain our streets. When you talk about having street workers, snowplows, that's just a part of it. You know, we've increased our miles of roadway in the last several years. I forget what it is, but it's increased quite extensively. I mean, right now, our police chief, to patrol those roads, needs at least 25 people in his department to patrol. And coming out by also, you know, remind people, we're trying to get Thornwood, we're slowly building it, you know, through help, exterior help, and we'll have that. And I see that as just as dangerous and as fast a highway as 79 is with the big trucks. So we're keep stretching the police department in addition to what the mayor was telling us, you know. So it's a never-ending thing, you know, to try to maintain all these things. And a few years ago, I might add, we increased our license plate tax to do some paving, which we do use, but we're having to use that to when they had some recent deterioration in Little Ridge to fix that. And every little bit, the council is allowing this, you know, the street commissioner to take money from that fund to repair it, which we have to. You know, you have to maintain our roads as safe as we can, and we want to. You know, it's not where we have to. We want to.
And the tough cycle is that as you know, asphalt is tied very closely to the cost of oil. Everybody's seen what's happened to the cost of oil in the last, you know, 6, 8, 10 years. Curbs are made out of concrete. Everybody knows how the cost of concrete has skyrocketed since, you know, China's economy has basically taken off.
Yeah, last year I had a driveway.
So it's becoming more and more expensive to pave each mile of street. It's becoming more and more expensive to recurb each mile of curbing that needs to be replaced. It's the costs to do these things are increasing while our revenue and our ability to put money to them have decreased.
Do you have the numbers on, again, just real basic things like what's our population like today, currently, in comparison to 5 years ago, or?
Well, I know that in the 2010 census, our population came in at 10,310. The 2000 census was maybe 8,500, 8,600?
87 sticks in my mind.
Is that right? Okay. I know that over 10 years, Heath was among the fastest growing populations in Licking County.
And then if you said too, like the number of homes or the number of, you've got more apartments, you have more whatever, I'm just wondering, do you do some type of calculation if you say, okay, there has to be a minimum of 5 full-time firemen? Is there some type of thing you say, well, hey, if housing or homes or residences have increased by a certain amount, but that certainly would contribute to
the workload that they have?
Well, the potential. I mean, nobody knows when there's going to be a fire, but I'm just saying there must be some type of.
If you have more structures, if you have more people, yeah, you're right. The numbers would indicate that you'd have an increased workload. Yeah. Yeah, Doug.
I really think that one of the things that the people need to know is that one of the expenses that we've had this year and the next 2 years is that we didn't have to pay the fire or the policeman any increases in wages. So that's an expense.
The ASME union didn't take an increase last year.
So, you know, this is the things that we're going to be looking at, but there's going to be an extra added.
But 0%, right? I'd have to say, a couple questions I'd have is, what are you paying in a typical wage? What are you paying in overtime? You know, what are you getting in benefits? They have a pretty strong health insurance, you know, because that's a total package. So I hear what you're saying, 0%, but there's a lot of businesses too where people are taking a 0% increase
This is
too.
true, but I'm just saying,
Yeah.
that,
I'm just
and we're
saying.
not looking for that really to stay there.
But I'm
know,
also, I
this
just
is-
think too, and looking at how you're spending your money, if we have 5 people, but you're spending a fortune in overtime, I don't know if we are or we aren't,
Mhm.
then sometimes too, it would be more cost effective to add another full-time person to the staff and reduce the overtime.
You know, we've
I'm just asking that
No,
question.
Yeah,
And the
no, it's a
mayor's
good
probably-
point because it's a good point because it's a good point because the question comes up quite a bit. We have, on average, I'm just going to go back a few years here. I'd say on average, we spend anywhere from $250,000 to $300,000 a year in overtime in the fire department.
Okay.
Now, that's pretty significant figure. But the way that shifts in the fire departments work, you have 3 shifts, and they each work 24 hours per shift. So, if you add 1 full-time firefighter, logistically, you're not able to do that because you add 1 firefighter, that person can only go on to 1 shift, okay? In order for us to reduce the amount of overtime that we pay, we would have to hire 3 full-time firefighters, okay? Now, if we hired 3 full-time firefighters, we would then have 6 on duty at any one time. And our minimum manning in our contract requires us to have 5 on duty at any one time. That would no doubt reduce our overtime costs. We could implement something where if you're going to schedule a vacation, nobody else on your shift can have a vacation day off. Okay? But firefighters do get sick, firefighters do get injured, and can sometimes be off for extended periods of time. We've looked at that possibility, and I've always contended that to me it doesn't matter if you're paying overtime or regular wages. They both go into payroll costs. And what we've seen is that in order for us to hire 3 full-time firefighters so that we could add 1 more to each shift, it would cost us more in the salaries and benefits for those 3 than it would be the money that we would save in overtime. Because you wouldn't be able to completely eliminate the overtime that you pay. But the added payroll costs of 3 more employees would exceed the money that you would save in the overtime. So, in essence, the way that the numbers work out, you're paying less money by paying overtime than you are to have that 6th person on that shift all the time. You know what I mean? It's something that Chief Huggins and I have looked at a number of times.
And I'm
to
just
try to
throwing that
figure
out.
out.
It's just trying to figure out,
Sure.
again, where
No,
you're spending
you know what?
money.
It's a very
And
good question, and the reason why I wanted to
those
go
are-
into that details
right.
because I guarantee you, Shelley,
Somebody else
you're
is
not
gonna
the
ask
yeah,
it.
you got it. You're not the only person that has that. It's a very logical question. Yeah.
I've brought that up numerous times, and I still get this, and I still don't agree with it.
I
I'm
think
sorry,
that
but
as Joe Blow, ordinary citizen, and I work outside of Heath.
Sure.
Almost everyone on my street works outside of Heath, actually.
Yeah.
I work in Columbus. I have the luxury of paying the higher tax, gas to drive there.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think you do my recommendation, if you were going to try to really influence people, I think you have to have, I think this is great, but I think you have to have really some more specifics. And one thing that I think, I know what the facts are, but I'm just talking what the perception could be to folks,
Sure.
is if you can drive through Heath right now, the average person is going to perceive that the city of Heath is spending a lot of money on 79. The facts are the city of Heath isn't, but I think you would have to have some things there to just to educate the public about
I think that's a good point.
where the money comes from, because you've got a big thing that almost everybody, I mean, that's the most popular strip you've got going on.
Sure.
So I think that's really important, because people are gonna say, oh, well, you didn't do a very good job budgeting your money, you just blew it all out on 79. So I don't wanna hear your troubles.
The biggest thing of it is.
That's a good
people-
point.
That's a good point, but people have to realize that the initial investment that was made to put that roadway in, for on the return that overall it cost, the people have to realize that really we were put into a position where, and I wasn't, I guess I was part of the thing of voting for it, because I couldn't see putting the mayor, with another, what was it, $480-some thousand in debt. If I would have voted no to stop that thing, we would
No,
have
no.
increased.
I think, Doug, you're missing her
That's not my
point.
point.
The point that she's making, no, no, Doug,
I'm just
the point
saying.
that she's making is what we, and she's right.
Right.
When we on city council
Okay.
are trying to communicate
Yeah.
this point, because it's going to come up,
Yeah.
what she's saying is we need to be able to illustrate the fact
Right.
that out of every dollar spent on that,
Right.
the city spent like 2.5 cents.
Right.
That the total amount of general fund revenue spent on this whole project probably doesn't amount to a quarter of the
Right.
pavement costs
Yes, that's what I'm trying
for
to
that
say.
project.
That's
That's
I'm
what
just-
she's
All
saying.
I'm saying is I think you need to, as a part
They-
of this, you're going to have to educate people, because otherwise they perceive and they will assume that this is where, when you see the money go down, they think you spent it out there on 79. You
Yeah.
didn't,
Yeah.
but they're going to think you did.
Yeah, yeah.
And-
That's right.
And
That's
the
right.
other thing is, I think that if you're going to say, okay, this is my head count, you know, for employees, I think you do have to do some more specifics. I'd have some more specifics on some of the projects and the investments that you made. I mean, to say, hey, we spent $5 million, I think you need to give some examples of some things that have been done in the community that people don't realize. They just think they happen. It's like dial tone comes from God. They just, no, and they're gonna
Right.
be, and they're gonna be the first to complain at the, you know, so I think
Yeah.
you need to give more specific examples of where that stuff comes from. And
Today. You mean
Today.
Today?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think it would be worthwhile doing, having some more facts about, you know, like you say, okay, there's more arrests, or there's more whatever. You've got to somehow illustrate. That's why I was asking how many more people. There's more people, so I got to believe there's more calls. It could be something as basic as a carbon monoxide thing going off in somebody's home, but you've got
Yeah.
more,
Or a false alarm in a business. or something.
whatever it is.
Yeah.
So I think having those examples, so you can't
So
grow.
show the increase in service
Yeah.
calls for, okay,
Yeah,
I see.
Same amount
because
of money.
you can say, I've got 5 full-time people, but I think it's gonna be more meaningful to somebody if you say, I've got 5 full-time people and I used to have 6, but the work we're doing is, you know, we've got this many calls or this many whatever. There's somehow you've got some numbers in there
Yep.
on those statistics.
And that type of information is going to be kind of strictly focused on police and fire.
Right, no, but
That
I'm
kind of
just
data is
saying-
not really evident.
No,
for,
but I'm just saying, if somebody wants to, if somebody's gonna try to pick it apart, I just think you're trying to say we need money to operate. We need, you know, you need money for certain capital things, etc. But I think you have to somehow, to me, I hear what you're saying, but there's a lot of vagueness there. And so you say, yeah, we have 5 full-time, or we have, you know, 3 full-time people doing the parks and they're doing an awesome job. that's all well and good, but I think somehow you've gotta put it into something that's more visible to the folks.
Shelley, I'll admit that I've encouraged vagueness or generalities. And to paint a generality, roughly 2/3 of the general fund budget is safety. It's police and fire. And you pointed out, asked the question what the population is now, 10,310, and 10 years earlier was 17% less or something to that, some round numbers again. We don't have as many policemen as we had 10 years ago. We don't have as many firemen as we had 10 years ago. And the general fund balances have declined in spite of revenue generating efforts of EMS billing, passport services, so forth and so on. I think that sometimes we can get caught up in the specifics of the numbers, and I think the generalities here paint the picture maybe better than the specifics. If you are personally interested, okay, if you're personally interested in some specifics, there we can provide those.
I'm not talking about me, I'm talking about
Them.
if you want people in the city of Heath to vote on this, I'm just giving you some friendly advice.
Yeah,
I'm telling you what I think my neighbors and friends that live in this community are gonna ask. And so I'm just giving you some advice.
Yeah.
If it were me, and some feedback, and I agree, you're not gonna have every single detail, but if I were trying to sell something, just like any business, if you're trying to get money to fund something, you wanna really show why you need it. And I don't disagree, and I agree with Mark, that you wanna be proactive rather than reactive. You don't wanna wait till everything falls apart, but, I hear it, I get it, the firemen need, people get sick and injured and all that kind of stuff. Like I said, a lot of people don't realize the things that happen on a day-to-day basis.
You just nailed a big part of it in what you said. Basically, of the budget, how much is police and fire? And of that, 10 years ago, we had how many employees for fire? We had how many employees for police? We now have a 17% increase in population, and we have less firefighters. This is the number. We have less police.
And you're gonna lose this estate tax. I think that's a valid point that people aren't gonna think about. And so, as you think about where does the money come from?
Yeah.
Some money comes
Yeah.
in, where's it coming
See, and
from?
that's
That's a big
where-
chunk of money.
And that's, Shelley, that's, I try to articulate that in where I said, look, this is going to happen throughout the state. Believe me, it's going to. Everybody's going to have to make a decision. Do we want to be a place where people are capable of living? I've been to a lot of places where people are able to live. Doesn't necessarily mean I want to live there, but you're able to live there. I want to live where people want to live. I think most people in Heath want a city where people will want to live. And like I said, it's a decision that's going to be a lot of people in the state in their own local area. They're going to have to make that decision.
Well, Heath has good schools, and we moved to Heath because of the school system.
And I still say, it's one thing, Mark, that I continue to say this, that if you want to travel the road, you're going to have to pay a toll. And the biggest thing of it is what people really have got to look at is how much from the income tax, or not income tax, but license plates fees goes into.
We get $150,000 a year from license.
$150,000 is a drop in the bucket when it comes to what we need to do with the streets in this city.
Yeah.
And being the chairman of the streets department, I know, and Bob, that crew does wonders. But we've got to look at places in this city and I think the people have got to realize this, that we've got to do something. We've got to have the money, because he's not going to be Houdini. He's not going to be able to escape the inevitable if we don't give give them the money to work with. So that's just.
Well, look what it cost to pave a mile of road in 2000 versus versus a mile of road in 2012. I mean, I don't know offhand, but I know it's got to be.
Oh, yeah.
Tremendous.
You know,
That's what I was telling you.
I bet we could
That
ask
comparison would be
Kokosa.
good.
And again,
I bet
that's
we could
something
ask
too
the
where
Kosa.
people, they have
Yeah.
no idea,
Yeah,
like,
people-
where does asphalt come from? It's free. It's on the truck.
Yeah.
They really don't know.
The city didn't
Yeah.
make that?
See, last
Behind
year,
the pool.
when I was having my driveways done, I was planning on having more done this year. They cost me $5,000 last year. And the contractor called me early and he says, Pete, I want to tell you something. He said, what you had done last year, this year is $800 more. And that's how much his cost in that gasoline tax or diesel tax added onto the concrete. So I said, well,
Yeah, Shelley, I want to thank you for coming tonight and for sharing some of your ideas. I mean, you know, these two hear us squawk all the time. I want to, because I mean, I think you are articulating points, and I've been the first one to admit it, and I've been mayor now for 2.5 years. I'm as much of the problem as anything. Since 2003, when the last ballot initiative failed, it's been 24 years since the income tax rate in the city of Heath has been increased. 9 years ago, there was a ballot initiative and it failed. The city government has not done an effective job of articulating to the residents of the city. The result of that is a reduction here, a no longer doing that, a we're not funding this adequately enough, we're going to try to put this in to generate revenue. The city has not done an effective enough job of communicating that, and that needs to end, you know, today. And that's going to be a big part of everybody who is going to work toward trying to have this ballot initiative pass, because that explanation needs to be understood by people. I think if people, like I said, to the core of the issue, I think people in Heath want to live in a great city. It has been. We all want it to continue to be. But Joe Public, and I was Joe Public for a long period of that time, I didn't notice any reduction in service. I didn't know what was being done or not done as a result of the financial situation. These need to be explained to people, and I think some of the things that you're highlighting are some of the things that not just you but others are going to need to have explained to them in just a very frank way. It is what it is, but people haven't had that information effectively shared with them so that they could digest it.
as long as I've been on the council, I've begged, I've pleaded year after year for years for more information on our water and wastewater department, and I never did get it until this guy took it over. And I tell you what, I think that we're going to do the same thing with our current mayor. Because that's frustrating to us as councilmen, when we say how, I remember I hadn't been here very long, I can't remember his name now, but Chuck Williams. He says, I am not going to approve another ordinance until you guys tell me what you're spending the last one on. And he was right. I thought he was nuts, but he was right. But it's not only the water and wastewater. We've all some of them is easier to understand. Water and wastewater is complicated because you collect money to pay for things, but we never did know that fully. And I think with Mark being here, not bragging on nobody, I think Pop is going to get it, but we're going to have to tell him.
Well, and I do think that's a good idea, is to show that, how many workers we do have now, and all the addition to, like I said, people don't realize that there are newer additions since we had all those people. There are extra roads, there's extra taps from water and wastewater, and there's all this extra stuff that they've had to add to it. but they just think, well, it's still Heath, it's about the same as what it's always been, and they just figure, oh, well, it's not, but there will come a time when we can't provide our, you know,
You
let's
guys
get to
are
the
trying to
point where we
best you
can't
can.
keep the money going.
I won't be able to, I'm gonna be unemployed because I won't be able to get
Nick,
to
did
work.
Nick have something?
Yeah,
Nick,
We're not gonna fetch you.
The thing I wanted to bring up was the thing about the census. You said there was like a 17% growth
over 10 years.
over 10 years.
Which is pretty strong for Licking
It's
County.
pretty strong, but I think if you're gonna use that, you really need to break it down a little bit. Because when I think that, I think, well, that's 17% more people paying taxes, and it's not the truth. I mean, I was talking to a gentleman just last week that retired and downsized to Heath.
Uh-huh.
I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
and a lot of those people are going to be children. You know, how many taxpayers do we? How many new homes? How many? I mean, you should use that information.
You know, as I recall, the 2010 census was not as detailed as I recall previous census being. I don't know if that data is available, but I will.
But you,
I think it would be to the city's advantage.
It's all
to be
about
able to-
No, I mean, well, like age demographics might be, but I'm talking about some of the other information that
Right.
that he's talking about. I know that it seemed like there were fewer questions on this census than I remember in the past. I don't know if it's just to try to encourage people to fill it out. I don't know, but no, I think you're right in that data is important. The eyeball test.
Yeah.
Okay, and I see this, and I've had people say this to me. The eyeball test tells me two things about the changing demographic of the people who live in Heath. Number one, there are more retirees in Heath than there used to be, say, 10, 15 years ago. And number two is those people who are not retired and are working, more of them are working out of the city. Meaning that A, you've got more retirees, and B, you're becoming more of a bedroom community. That's just the eyeball test. I don't have the numbers, but it's just what I see, and it's what others have told me they see too. Now, as it relates to this particular ballot initiative, if you're retired and you don't pay income tax to the city, guess what? This doesn't affect you. You're not going to pay anything for this. If you work outside the city, as we outlined, depending on what your income tax rate is, you're probably not going to pay any more either. And the days of 1,000 people working at Kaiser, 1,500 people working there at what used to be Rockwell, is now Meritor, right? The base with everything. Look, that's not the way business operates today. That's not the way manufacturing operates today. We could have a business purchase 100 acres out in the industrial corridor on the west side, make a $200 million investment in building a new facility in operation. They may hire 300 employees. You do not need the number of employees to produce something that you used to have. And so there's that dynamic at play as well. Like I said, the demographics of the city are changing to the extent that we can kind of grasp that data and spit it out in a way that makes sense, I think would be helpful. But the eyeball test seems to me to indicate more retirees and more of a bedroom community than what we've been 10, 15, whatever years ago.
I think something that you also need to look at is just how much information do you want to give the public? Like take Columbus, for example. They just had a big tax initiative passed not too long ago today. I remember sitting on and watching television, and they came across and said, there will be 150 firemen laid off. There will be so many policemen laid off. There will be this, they just kept beating it and beating it and beating it. I mean, I'm not saying that you want to attack it that way, but maybe you may have to attack it to a certain point that way. You may say, well, the people in Willow Ridge, if we pass this tax, they may get new streets next year. But if we don't, it may be 8 years away or 9 years away. If we do, I mean, I think we need to lay it on the line and tell people, you know. I mean, those curbs in Southgate were put in the 60s. And, you know, look what we're in 2012 now, and they're just chipping away to nothing. You know, and the cost, I mean, these people have to understand that, you know, these roads and streets, I mean, that's the biggest thing I see.
Oh,
I mean,
I like the, what did it cost 10 years ago to pave a mile? What does it cost today? What did it cost? What did concrete cost 10 years ago?
But
I mean,
we
could probably get a hold of
if we keep
proposing
prolonging
something
this
like that.
tax initiative, it's, you know, the longer you wait, the more money you spend on a road.
Absolutely.
So
The
I
further
mean,
it
instead of
deteriorates.
just paving over it and putting the base, and then you're replacing the base.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and you're starting all over again on a brand new street. So, I mean, I don't know how much you want to play hardball or how you want to get this across to the public, but, I mean, you can be nice about it and say, well, you know, we hope we get this, but maybe there's going to have to be some strong sentences put out there.
Harsh reality,
Yeah, you
What's
know,
gonna be, what will happen.
what's the streets going to look like in 10 years from now if we don't increase the
Okay,
tax?
plan A? Oh, you're plan C, okay.
Maybe.
You know,
Yeah, maybe.
why'd you spend all that money
You're
out
probably
there?
right, but showing people that we used to have it was 18 firefighters, was it not? Like 10 years ago?
Full time.
Full time.
Yes.
But 18, we now have 15.
And
Plus
you have,
we're
when
10
did
years
we
late.
build the other fire station? That was in.
You know, talk about retirees.
Nice.
When was that built?
99?
99 was the bill, I think.
Pretty sure 99.
I was thinking it was that.
Yeah, 99.
A little bit of
Talk about
road for-
retirees a while ago. I live on a cul-de-sac that has 20 houses. I'd say the last 8 years, out of that 20 houses, there's 18 of us that's retired. Totally retired. That's a big percentage.
Well, I'm counting down the days to August 21st.
Is that right?
No, I'm counting down the 70 days you posted.
Oh!
Oh!
Bridge, we live on the other side.
Yeah.
It's like the
Yeah.
other side of the island.
I know.
Really.
It's gonna be done ahead
I
of
don't know,
time.
we got that.
Mark my words, it's gonna be
It
done
looks
ahead
like
of
it's
time.
good for you.
It
It's
it
ahead.
is most definitely on schedule to be complete.
Yep. It's gonna be.
Yay.
I'm getting tired of going around that.
Yeah,
know.
I am too, I'm tired.
Anybody have anything else? And hey, thanks for coming.
Yeah.
Thank you, Shelley. Like I said,
I already said something to her about maybe possible on down the road, Mark, maybe she could get some of her neighbors.
I think some of the points that she raised.
Oh, they're great.
Pre-register for the dog paddle.
One person.
That's good.
I was gonna say my dog had one.
Hey,
If I'm in swimming, that's what I'm doing.
A free gift, and I'm back here sent to you. Still trying to find out.
I'll let you know more about my father-in-law.
Yeah, did you get a priest?
Yes.
Who did you get?
If somebody should say Francis.
Oh, okay. Father Solomon,
Maybe.
he's the new,
Yeah.
he's the new,
I think that's who it was. I wasn't there.
really nice guy, short guy.
I wasn't there at the time, but I think that was who.
You're
it was.
welcome.
Thank
See
you,
you
Shelley.
later.
Yep.
Thanks for coming.
See ya.
Come back often.
I
used to hate it when these guys came, but I love them
Well, I'm
now.
glad.
And I feel so good strongly about
I
it.
tried to hunt up Father Mike's number. Father Mike was on vacation. So the one that was handling it was the little, the guy that speaks foreign Italian.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Father Ronnie.
Father Ronnie.
Yeah.
Couldn't
He's
think
a
of
nice
what,
guy.
yeah.
I
And
like
I couldn't get a hold of him either, because I was trying to
Yeah.
get him
He's
to
a
call
nice
you.
guy.
Monday night, council.
Yes.
Kroger store manager, I had talked with her, you know.
Yeah.
She's coming to council.
Oh, good.
And
Excellent.
I'll introduce you to her. Please. And I think she'll be a good one, you know, for some acres there for stuff
Well,
for
you
you.
know what? Giant Eagles, Bob, Vogel left the Giant Eagle. They have fallen off the face of the earth being involved in things.
Yeah.
Okay, the guys from Hilliard, I tried to get them on my mayor's task